Hi, I'm William F. Bryant, and this is my Voped podcast, another big business segment. I was going to talk a little bit about the human resources aspect. And I wanted to bring this up because one of the things that I've always believed when going through, say, an MBA program or something of that sort, is that when you came out of it, you should be able to fully start up a company, incorporate it or structure it however you want the operational governance to be, and then go ahead and fill it with employees and work out your supply and operations and then distribution, understand the financing and some of the accounting aspects that go with it, and then kind of be up and running. At the very least, not everything has to be optimized or perfect, but when you first start out as a company, that's not, you're not going to be as optimal as you can anyway. You're going to do with what you can and whatever kind of financing you have available for you to actually run your operations. But this is what I believe, and for the most part, some of that is true, but so much of the math and computations were taken out of it, and also the resources available for people who run businesses, that just simply isn't true. In fact, I would be willing to bet that most people who come out would still have some issues with how to actually start up a company and where to go, let alone the pieces that go into actually sourcing employees for it and operations. So I wanted to talk about the human resources because this aspect actually kind of brings you to the one place that is a start for anybody who wants to do any kind of a business. And that's the Secretary of State for your given state. And a lot of people probably don't know that when you go to start a business, it's actually registered in the state in which you're going to operate, give or take. I mean, there are plenty of companies who file their articles of incorporation in other states and then operate in a state separate. Delaware is a very common one for an awful lot of corporations to file their articles of incorporation. But then there are stipulations to addresses that you have to have and other things, whether or not you can actually do those. And once again, it goes back to how much money do you actually have to do these things. And so I'll just reference that if you're going to do a small business, say you're going to do your t-shirt business, or maybe you're doing a gym or a yoga studio or something of that sort, the odds are is that you are going to file for incorporation in the state that you're in. And a lot of that information is going to be available on your Secretary of State website. And so that's where you should probably go to start. And then you should be able to get some more information from there. But I wanted to bring that up because, once again, if you go into the human resources aspect and you want to begin looking at hiring on employees and some of the things that go into having employees in your given state, you're also going to have to go to the Secretary of State in order to have that done. And you're going to need to look at independent contractors versus employees and how the state sets up whether or not that is going to be, how they're going to be defined in terms of whether you have to pay payroll taxes or how benefits work. You're also going to have a lot of the legal compliance issues that go along with hiring of employees that are also state specific. Obviously, you have federal ones that also go along with all of these things, but your incorporated entity is going to be also mostly within the state, and that's what you're going to have to understand when you go into it. So that's the place where you want to begin your search and get an idea of a lot of the legal compliance and the outline that goes along with it for your specific state. That they're also going to include things like whether you need to have liability or not, because as a matter of fact, Texas doesn't have liability, and for like worker accidents and stuff, it ends up being that it's kind of like a pay cash out of pocket. They're the only ones in the union, I believe, that have that. But so I mean, that kind of goes a little bit into it. But other things like workers' comp and those kinds of insurances, that's the place to go, and that's the place to start. And so when dealing in human resources, go to the Secretary of State first before you really go on. And then obviously you can always go deeper into it with a consultant who might know more about that aspect of the human resources, and you can discuss more with them. I always tend to think it's better to go to an attorney and go direct to the source as far as that goes, or to go to I don't really want to call them an application, but I guess it's kind of like a subscription as a service. If you go to a company that you contract out and they offer your human resources for you, and they'll keep you in compliance. I guess it's kind of a SaaS. And so you've got those options as well. Another reason why I bring this up is because there's a move, and I'm going to just simply, state it as it's a manifestation from the wokeism that has been going on for 30 plus years. Your human resources has been co-opted to be a behavioral culture component for corporations. If you wonder how most of them end up being a wokist and Marxist viewpoint, this is where it comes in. And so you're not really taught about the actual legal and structural components of how to set up a business HR. You're taught about how it should feel in your corporation. And so two bits on this. Number one, I don't necessarily think that having a corporate culture is a bad thing. Obviously, you want to have people who are driven and see the goals for the corporation, and they're going to take it there, and that's what you want in any of your employees, and that makes complete and perfect sense. However, when doing this and combining it with the ability to have a gatekeeper type scenario in a corporation, this is a bad thing. And what I mean by a gatekeeper is that everything has to pass through a certain few people. The fewer the number of the people, the worse it can get. If you were going to run your finances and accounting, and you were going to allow the exact same person to put out orders, and they were going to put out the orders, they were going to receive the invoices, and they were going to do your payments, well, that's just really bad cash handling right there. You need to separate those out. Maybe people can put in orders and they're going to receive the invoices, but somebody else should do the payments. And they talk about this all the time when you get into your finance and accounting components of your business. But you need to have checks and balances. And so if you have a gatekeeper type scenario with a handful of people, it's just bad news all around. And you can see this more and more in a lot of places that actually do offer human resources services, where they will say things like, you may have to fire your best employees because they don't fit your culture. Well, there should be a red flag in that. And that's where you get these scenarios. And unfortunately, human resources has been now skewed in most of the universities to that aspect, and it's now a behavioral component, and only those people who have the right belief systems are hired for a company, and this is where you end up being after all of it. It's unfortunate. I've never really liked gatekeeper scenarios. I think that that for the most part, obviously there's the legal compliance issue is a huge, huge component for a company. And so human resources in that respect is extremely important, and what they do is extremely important for that. Your base employees, entry level, also, if you consider the amount of time to do a lot of training, hiring, searching for base level employees, that is something that, quote unquote, you outsource from your specific departments that need the entry level to your human resources area. As you move up the rankings and you get into middle management, lower executives, that should component, and actually the more STEM based it is, the less it should be on the responsibility of the human resources to do the hiring. The human resources should stick to the areas, like I said, if you're doing base entry level and legal compliance. By doing this, you can actually streamline the number of people that you have in human resources, because it ends up being full of waste, for lack of a better term. And you don't need people who aren't doing things. And so in today's technology, you don't need as many people. You need to actually utilize the technology available in an area and then make it go as far as you possibly can. Having, seen a lot of people go through interview processes and try to go online and do application submissions, having to do it personally, and also listening to other colleagues have to do it. There are only a handful of companies that actually even offer the application processes. Most of them end up being a headache, and there's very little way that you're going to be able to have an actual accurate representation of the skills based upon keywording systems, because that just got mad out of place. Everybody's got some kind of an acronym for something, and having those acronyms doesn't mean that you can do it, number one. It doesn't mean that you can't do it, number two, if you don't have them. I mean, and so obviously the bigger the company is, the less they seem to be concerned about these aspects. But when you have people who have substantial amounts of experience in given areas, and they continually get overlooked by things, there's issues. There's issues in the system, and it's a bigger waste of time. I also usually use STEM bias. If I see somebody who's got STEM experience in something or STEM education, I'll put them ahead of everybody else. In general, the capacity to do some kind of science, tech, math, or engineering means that the skills needed for high-level cognitive function and rationalizing and even optimization are already there. They've already done them in their studies continually, and they're going to do them in their work. I've seen friends who went on, they were be like PhD economists, and when they would work their summer jobs as undergrads, I still remember they'd be working in, say, manufacturing plants, and they would look for ways to optimize the line just to it made their job easier, in the scheme of things, and it made everybody else's jobs easier, but it's just what they did because that's the way their mind works. And so I'm always going to be biased to anybody who's got some kind of a STEM background, because their learning curve is going to be much steeper. In addition, if you've never, most of the people who are hiring for higher or executive level management in human resources have never done any of the skills or even remotely close to the skills necessary for some of the STEM components in the higher levels. If you've never done it, you get the general, hey, I'm a math major, and somebody asks, well, what are you going to do? Teach. that right there should be a red flag that the person who says that has no idea about how many things mathematical toolbox are contained within in all areas, whether it's finance, economics, chemistry, engineering, computer science, and then your algorithms. Even if you get into several areas of biology, virology, virology, or any of these other sciences. And if they don't know those areas, you cannot look at somebody's background and say that they're a fit or not a fit just by looking at a comparative set of words, phrases, or some other guidance system to try to figure it out. It'd be akin to looking for a mechanic, and maybe the mechanic has only really worked on carbureted engines, okay? And they work on classic cars, and they work on the carbureted versions, and it's usually big blocks. But you're looking for someone who runs on fuel-injected small blocks. Well, yeah, they're work on engine components, but most people who would do the comparing, who are in your hiring process or your talent acquisitions, wouldn't select those people, even though a carbureted version is significantly more complex than a fuel injected. And the skills to actually transition to a fuel injected could probably be easily learned by the person who dealt in the carbureted version. Whereas going the reverse might not be true, because carbureted versions are all mechanical and analog, which requires a completely different mindset in going to it than if you only worked on fuel injected. And I've actually seen that in mechanics. And so if you don't know about those two things, there's no way that you can make that determination. And you may lose people who would normally be perfect fit. And so somewhere along the lines, your managers decided that they would just have everybody be hired through human resources, and they didn't want to put up with it because they didn't have the time or what have you. The thing is that if you actually break down time and amount of time to do hirings, if you know exactly what you need, you can page through 20 minutes a day and probably in 20 minutes sift through 40 or 50 applications and pick out 2 and do 2 every single day, and you could do it over 1 week. You get through roughly 220 to 250 applications, depending on how quickly you burn through them. You pick 2 or 3 each day. That's 15 applicants. Odds are in 250 applications and 15 that you select, you're going to get to 1. And that's all it took was 20 minutes each day. And you know exactly what you're getting. And the reason why I say this is because when I went interviewing for actuarial consulting positions, the team lead, the team managing actuary, he's the one who selected the people for the interviews. He sifted through the 60 or 70 applications. He selected 4, brought in all 4, and boom, it was done. I mean, and it was that fast, and he did it. And so if an actuary who spends their time having to do all kinds of risk assessment and cost benefit analysis and all of these things, if they determine that the cost benefit is there for them to do the hiring personally and they have the time to do it, then it's probably cost beneficial to everybody else to have it done as well. But you can make up your mind on that. I just think that because so few people understand STEM and mathematics, that if you don't have the people who are in those areas specific to them do the hiring, you're going to miss the people who are actually beneficial to a corporation. And this may be why a number of our corporations are just termed zombie cores and haven't really seen any actual progression in technological advancements for their firms or outputs, aside from people just developing tech apps, fintech or, whatever payment apps or something. And yeah, these things can save you time and they can save you money. But at the same time, where does it really help actual operations? And I'm a big commodities component person where you have to do real work, real output. Applications and technology are nice, but that's not real work, real output. What it does is save you cost, which in business terms is always time. Everything is termed cost in time, and it can always be broken down to time. And so somewhere you've saved all the time you can, and you need to get back to the basics and the optimization of actual real work, real materials, real processes. And that the only way to do that is to have brain power. And so that really goes into who you're hiring and who you're keeping. Now, being on that note, I also wanted to add things about pay for employees, because people and companies, oftentimes you have your set pay scales for areas. And once again, this is where the assessment just gets blended in, because you have tiered areas and tiered components that make up what they can get paid. And you can only do that to a certain degree, because you need to address individual cases and exceptions. The fact is that I'll use restaurants for an example, because this will be really easy to picture and understand. Say you have a cook who's maybe cooked for a little bit, and I just witnessed it. So I'm doing this video 4th of July weekend, so I've seen this. But they can do one order at a time, and maybe they do the order right, but they can only do one order at a time, and they're getting paid their $14 an hour or whatever, right? And now you have another person who can do maybe 6, 7 orders, maybe even 8 orders at a time on a grill. They've got everything organized. They've got their burgers, their fries, their chicken sandwiches. They've got everything running, and they're running 8 at a time. And they want $16 an hour. And you're like, well, I don't know, that's $2 more than what we pay our chefs. Now think about what you just said there. If he got 8 orders, you have all 8 being done, and whatever time it takes for the actual cooking to be, they're flowing out. Where the other guy can only do 1 at a time because he really can't process more than that. Okay? And so it takes, roughly 8 times as long for him to do it than the other guy to do it. So there you've lost customers because of patience levels, and they're probably never going to come again. Even if the food ends up being perfect for the one guy, time for people, time in general, remember it always goes back to time, they may never visit your restaurant again. And it took him 8 times as long, and so you actually end up paying him for 8 times longer than whatever it was. Say, just to break it down, you'd say you ended up paying him, an hour to make those burgers where he did it in 10 minutes. And so you paid him 50 more minutes worth of time than you did this other guy. And that 50 more minutes cost you just under like $12. All right. And so you already paid that, where the other guy made 8 orders and he gets paid, he wanted $16 an hour. And those 10 burgers those 8 orders got just, chucked out in 10 minutes. And so, if you do breakdowns of flow-through rates, okay, this is where the process comes in. And if you watch a brief segment on the supply chain one, I talk a little bit about flow-through rates for the entire supply chain. But you have to assess, what is my rates going out, and how does that relate to what the actual pay is. And you already do this in your company in several other areas. You'll do that when you're looking at machinery that you're going to buy, or how you set up your lines, and the number of people versus machines you're going to use, how much inventory you're going to stack at each line, and you're already using flow rates to calculate things out. Well, the same things have to be done for people who end up being more efficient and more adaptable to given scenarios, and their output and and product flow is better than everybody else's. They end up being worth more to you than other people. When you start to incorporate other things into that scenario, where you actually start to think of people as as another component in the process, then you begin to realize, well, if they stay with me for, say you've got one piece of equipment, they're worth, 10 years on your depreciation scale. So hopefully they're worth 10 years of time. Well, if this person isn't going to leave me, then however much I give them is worth that much to me in the same kind of scenario. It's worth that 10 years for me to keep them on and bump up how much I'm paying them. Okay. And keeping good employees on, to a degree, can kind of be thought of as a shield, in the same way as you look at, granted, depreciation cash already goes out. So as you do your interest rates and you do your workers' expenses, and any, salaries and admin and all that kind of stuff that goes out. But the thing is that those things are all deductible as well. Those are all costs of doing business. And yes, those costs may go up, but if those costs are going up, at the same rate that you're doing, say your depreciation, because your costs of doing business are going to increase with sales, but you can use less people or keep the better people along the way. You can pay them more at those levels. You have to consider how it is that you're compensating the employees. And the fact is that some employees are going to be better and worth more than others. The people and the companies that try to make it where you're going to have to fire your best employees and blah, 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 and your workplace needs to be a cultural environment, and it's like you need to be on the same page, and you can't have aggravations. Absolutely. That's a given. But a lot of people just work and do the best they can. And that's where they're at. And they don't cause any issues. They don't do any of those things. You keep those people on, and you consider the increases in pay and whether they're worth that increase in pay. And then they'll stay with you for those lengths of time. And it's not really any different from the increases as sales increase for other expenditures that needed to support those sales, because you do the same thing when you have to increase your working capital. In order to increase sales, you're going to have to increase machinery. You're going to have to increase your plants and inventories. Perhaps your accounts receivable are going to go up. You increase support for those sales. Well, it's no different than actually if you were to take a real look at human resources and not be scaling factors of where they're at, because you don't look at the equipment used or the line set up or those optimizations in the same way. And so you shouldn't look at the people. If the people are truly a resource for you, the people need to be looked at in that same way. Are they worth more? Are they optimizing? Are they getting better? Are they going to be with it for 10 years? And if you look at it from that component, then it changes how you approach things. The entire treating of people on these scales like that, it took out the individualism and the personalization for each person, which, yes, that can be a cost component. But if you took the opportunity to take the time to assess these components, in the long run, it can actually save you money. And you can't look at things just as comparative components on a piece of paper when dealing with behavioral characteristics in individuals and personalities, because it's going to be a detriment to your company. And so that's a long-winded bit there on human resources, but hopefully it changes some of the way you think about the people who work for you. And yeah, I've always been a worker's manager mentality. So that's my 2 bits on that.